All right, we can go ahead and get started. People will filter in during the introductions and stuff, so that'll be great. Um, Thank you, everyone, for attending this Team Science Skills Series put on by the Georgia CTSA. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you a couple updates. First, we have an upcoming session, another Team Science Skills workshop on December 8th with Dr. Sean Burke from the University of Central Florida, and she'll be talking about how to build effective team cognition. So making sure everyone's on the same page, making sure that everyone knows who's responsible for what on a team. And so I'm really looking forward to that event. I also want to remind everyone that following the session, an evaluation form will be available for you to fill out. Within the evaluation form, we'll have the opportunity for you all to sign up to potentially have a consulting session with our experts. And today, I'm pleased to introduce our expert, Tom O'Neill, who's going to be presenting today on make Teamwork Makes the Dream Work, focusing on conflict management style. So Dr. O'Neill is from Calgary, and he is the director of the Individual and Team Performance Lab. He has expertise in a variety of team topics, including human autonomy, teaming, virtual teamwork, and cyber slacking, leadership, team member personality, and what he's talking about today, conflict dynamics in teams. Now, he's been funded to do this research by multiple institutions, been cited over 5,000 times, so it's really a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Thomas O'Neill. Tom, all you.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks everyone for having me here today. Really excited to do this for you. You can call me Tom. I never go by doctor in the medical community since I'm not a physician. And today I'm really happy to talk to you about conflict management styles. More broadly, I'm a high performance teamwork researcher, but I did do my dissertation on the topic of conflict and conflict management in organizational work teams. I finished that in 2011, and I've been up here in the north in Canada at University of Calgary ever since. So 12 and a half years just about, who's counting? So I'm the head of our industrial and organizational psychology program, and I'm not sure, I imagine you know something about that discipline. The way I describe it is we draw from psychological principles to try to make the workplace better. And that can be from the perspective of, you know, the employees and staff and leaders and trying to improve their well-being and their individual effectiveness and their group effectiveness, all the way to, you know, more organizational effectiveness, strategy, culture, that kind of thing. So it's a really, really fun place to play in, I think. Work affects all of us, some of us more, some of us less. And so it's something that's highly consequential to our happiness. I also co-founded a company, I'm out of it now, called Work Evolution. And that specialized in what we're now calling hybrid work. So Chris mentioned the cyber slacking topic. So I'd studied, you know, how people maintain their effectiveness when working remotely, and do remote work programs and hybrid work programs work. And that kind of was birthed out of my research, and then I had a consulting company for that, that no one cared about really until the pandemic. And then as soon as the pandemic hit, everybody wanted to know how to make that happen. And so it was acquired, and it's old news now, but it's something that often a lot of people want to talk about, and I can talk pretty practically to that as well. All right, so we're gonna go into conflict management styles. Now, you can check your email, because if you had pre-registered before like Wednesday or during the day on Wednesday, you would have received an invitation from my platform, itpmetrics.com. I call it that because my lab is called the Individual and Team Performance Lab. It's a free assessment and feedback platform. And one of the assessments that I have in there is my conflict management styles assessment. And this session will be more impactful for you if you can complete the assessment. And it only takes a few minutes, and then you get a personalized report. So if you don't see that invitation, maybe check your junk folder. If you registered a little more recently, you might have to try to go and see if you can get in there manually. You can absolutely do it now, kind of while I'm setting things up, and you don't have to. I think it's just a nice takeaway, and it'll make the session a little bit more interactive. As you can see, it's not designed for people to just go in and do one-off assessments, but there is a way. So you could just go to my website, www.itpmetrics.com, sign up for free, create an assessment, choose the conflict management styles. You have to click here to take individual assessments. Then you have to click this again. So sorry, it's a little convoluted. It wasn't designed this way, and it's all grant funded. So I'm running things on a bit of a shoestring budget. But let me know if you need some help with that, or maybe some of the moderators can help direct you. Just feel free to use the meeting chat. And that's something that I want to make use of today. So I really encourage you to go into the chat and participate. There's a number of ways that I'll be calling on you to do that, but don't worry, I won't call you into a breakout room. All right, so I think it's always important to start any session, any interaction with just a brief check-in, see how people are feeling. We all have multifaceted lives. We're all coming in today from with that as a backdrop. So maybe some of you, if you're feeling up to it, you can drop in the chat where you're at. Like maybe you're a 1A and you have hearts in your eyes. Hopefully you're not a 2A, but hey, some of us, we're all humans and we all have things going on. Maybe that's where you're at. So feel free to just drop something in the chat for a quick check-in here, where you're at. Okay, I'm giving you a second to do that. Tracy says 2B. Thank you. Oh, that's nice, Tracy. Love it. And Lauren's a C4. C4. Oh, yeah. Yeah, C4 is one of my favorites. Good one, Lauren. Susan is AC. Vivian says 5B. That's great. I like that. And Amanda's a C5. That's an interesting one. I'd like to talk to you more about that one. Thanks, Amanda. And a few more people popping in. So thanks for doing that. Always good to have a little bit of a check-in. Something else too that I like to share and recommend you consider for your practice, as a leader, as a manager, as a team member, as a person, is the concept of connect before content. And I sort of cite Belongify there because that's actually a startup here in Calgary that I kind of took the term from. So I don't want them to think I'm stealing anything. But the idea is, before jumping right into the content of the interaction, set up that sort of container space for a good interaction. And so it's just anything to, kind of lubricate the conversation. And a fun one I thought we could do for this online session is maybe look at an animal here and pick one and just say really briefly in the chat why that particular animal kind of speaks to you today. When I'm in person, I actually bring stickers and we put it on our shirt. That's why it says that. So yesterday I was doing this exact same session in person and I had an owl. For some reason, the owl spoke to me. I was in, I guess, an owly kind of kind of mood. Any of these animals kind of jump out to you, and maybe you could just say what made it jump out to you. You can throw that in the chat. If anybody wants to speak up too, of course, more than welcome. More than welcome. Okay, Alice, Amanda's the monkey, and I'd love to hear why, Amanda. Allison went with rhino, tough but happy. I love it. I love it. And the rhino here looks, yeah, the rhino here looks super friendly and cute, right? Who else? Couple more. Tracy goes with the elephant because I'm the opposite. Keep forgetting what I'm supposed to be doing. That's good. Thanks, Tracy. Brad, Lemur, Energy Social. Lemurs are great, aren't they? They're the best at the zoo. And Amanda, swinging in all directions and just trying to laugh through it all because you chose the monkey. Perfect. Love it. Susan says the giraffe because the giraffe's cute. Yeah, for sure. So that's good. You can do, there's a multitude of things you can do with your teams to just take those few minutes to kind of refill the trust bank, right? So the concept of the trust bank is it gets refilled as we have social, relational kind of interactions. And then again, that kind of creates some lubrication for having harder conversations, right, about the content. And good teams will approach difficult conversations, right? They don't shy away from them. They recognize that those difficult conversations, those conflict kind of conversations, are the conversations that have to happen to be a high performing team. But it's kind of like having a car, right? If you run a car engine without oil, the car is not going to get very far. You've got to maintain that car. So you've got to deal with both the task content and kind of the socio-relational kind of stuff. So always keep that in mind. Okay, good. So thanks so much. All right. So one little model I'll show you without, getting technical is one that I actually pull from the, popular press literature. Go ahead and do a thumbs up or something in the chat if you've read the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So this is one you could probably buy at your local Indigo or Chapters or bookstore. It's written by a consultant, but it really does have a lot of intuitive sense to it. And every concept that people that's talked about in there, people can relate to, and it has a wealth of published, peer-reviewed research underlying it. So the idea here is that a team will tend to be in more of a reactive state when they have an absence of trust. So the foundation of the pyramid is around trust. And without trust, a team will have a hard time having that constructive conflict, that constructive fact-driven debate, right? And so essentially you have a team that's not really speaking up. It's kind of the nodding heads kind of team where, a proposal's put out and everybody just kind of nods. No one really questions it. And when you have a situation like that, people are unlikely to be committed ultimately to the team's decisions, to the team's objectives, because they're not having the healthy conflict and the expression of different ideas and concerns that once you've worked through would allow them to create a sense of psychological commitment to the team's objectives and to the other team members too. And with a lack of commitment, teams avoid accountability. Commitment's a super powerful force. If you think about something you've been really committed to in your life, it could have been running a marathon, could have been running a 5K, could have been, something to a family member, it could have been to lose 10 pounds. It could be to your relationship with your significant other. When you say this has to happen and I make a psychological commitment to it, accountability is not an issue. Accountability is an issue when people aren't committed. So with an avoidance of accountability, there's really just an inattention to results. And ultimately, without results, we don't get performance, and we're not achieving what we are meant to achieve. And this is just an unsatisfactory, reactive kind of state. And I mean, I do quite a bit of consulting, and you know, I would say the majority of teams I run into have problems in this pyramid. And you kind of have to start from the lowest level and work your way up. On the other hand, an effective team will be more in a creative and proactive kind of mindset and space, right? So they have a foundation of trust. They recognize each other as human beings, right? Not just other instrumental kind of factors that can be leveraged to get ahead. Okay. When we have trust, there's no problem approaching conflict. In fact, conflict is kind of fun, right? And so they'll have those difficult discussions, come to joint decisions, and then people will be committed, and that unleashes a boatload of motivation. And with that commitment, again, people are much more willing to be accountable. I talk about social accountability. I'm not talking about contractual accountability, but social accountability, being willing to be held accountable by your peers, right? Or even by your leader or manager. And then the focus is all about outcomes, right? It's about achievement. It's about moving forward. It's about impact. It's about thinking ahead and being creative. Okay, so that's Patrick Lencioni's kind of model. It's the only model I'm going to talk about today from a sort of high performance teamwork stance. The idea is that you need to kind of take care of these pieces to make sure that the team has a good container space for having highly consequential and impactful dialogue and discussions when they're teaming. So, I'm working with an executive leadership team now, and, they're having all kinds of problems through the whole pyramid. And, they want to jump to results and strategizing and things like that, but they don't have an environment where it's safe to speak up. They don't have psychological safety. So we got to kind of tear them right down. I hate to use that kind of language, and rebuild it back up, from the beginning. Okay. It turns out this team has some untouchables that's their words, not mine, that are just super difficult to talk about. And if stuff like that doesn't get addressed, you can't have the healthy conflict. You can't move up into results. They get results, but it's not very sustainable. You know what I mean? And a lot of teams are in that shape. They're getting output, of course, or else, there'd be an intervention. The people would be let go or moved to another team. The leader would be changed or something like that. All right. So very sort of nice little intuitive model. And again, something you can bring forward. We're not going to be working on trust today because I imagine you're not all on the exact same team. Probably come from a lot of different teams. We're gonna talk about this conflict space and try to give you some tools for thinking about how to manage conflict more effectively. And if you're able to do the assessment as well, to better understand your preferences for approaching or not approaching conflict, and help you understand that those are good, and there might also be some other ways of dealing with things as well, right? So does that make sense to people? Any questions about that one that somebody wants to voice or throw in the chat before we move on? I'm not going to come directly back to this. Does it make sense to people? Heather says it works. Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you, Heather, for jumping in. It's always good to get a little bit of feedback, especially in these virtual sessions. Amanda says it makes sense. And I don't know how to pronounce your name, but you said
Shankar is good.
Pardon?
Shankar?
Sankar?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Sankar. Appreciate it. So yes, this resonates with my previous experiences. That's cool. And Susan says, yeah. So that's interesting. It's good feedback, just because It's always good to know. I teach this in executive education as well as kind of the foundation of thinking about high performance teamwork. Of course, there's lots to it, but you can ask Chris. We have thousands of published studies, and sometimes they're just too technical or too hair splitting, right? And I think that this just gives some good context. So that's good. I'll leave it at that. So in terms of learning outcomes, and of course, this isn't session 2 for you. This is really just this one session. But and Chris, yeah, 100% thanks. Yeah, exactly. It's always a challenge to distill all of our scientific literatures, right, and to practice. So the 3 things: I want you to learn the theory of conflict in general, but specifically conflict management styles. Number 2 is understand and explore your own conflict management styles, and maybe even hear a little bit about other styles and gain some insights to help you engage in healthy and productive conflict. And conflict itself is a massive field. It's, again, proliferation of research and research ideas, right? There's actually conferences dedicated to conflict, believe it or not. And this is one model, but again, it's a very intuitive and helpful model. We can diverge too per your sort of questions and your engagement. So that'll make things more interesting if you pipe up wherever you can. In that spirit, one of the things that drew me to wanting to study conflict was this kind of paradox about the good and the bad of conflict, the pros and cons of conflict, because there really are 2 sides to it. So maybe we can start with your thoughts on what are some of the good things that can come out of a conflict with another person or a conflict among a team. Would you like to maybe use the chat, or I don't know if anybody wants to speak up and say what's something good that can happen through conflict? So Brad says mutual understanding moving forward. And I see resolution there as well, and new avenues for understanding, Amanda says. So I'll just dig into those a bit more. Certainly learning is an outcome of conflict if you can be open-minded. Key word, right? Open-minded to learning, having a growth, not a fixed mindset, right? To think, hey, there's something here maybe I can pick up and bring forward with me that I didn't have in mind before. Something I just needed to be reminded about. I knew about it, but I fell into some old habits and I sort of forgot. So learning 100% and resolution as well. So the idea of, just avoiding conflicts, which, for a lot of us is a natural response because conflict is uncomfortable. We have a harder time getting a resolution. We may never get a resolution. And, especially in an academic environment, oftentimes we're working with the same people for a very, very long time. And so resolution doesn't come because somebody moves on, as much as sometimes we might like that to happen. So we really need to go through the conflict to come to a resolution and get to a better place, basically. But it often, gets a little worse. It gets a little harder before it gets better. And we have to be willing to go through that. And Susan says creativity. So yeah, that's a big one, right? I mean, the whole point of having a team in many cases is to have diverse perspectives, and everybody wants diversity, but nobody wants disagreement. Right? So if we want to have diversity, we have to be comfortable with understanding that, people are going to have widely different ideas, even philosophies and values about how to move forward, right? And so we need the skills, the interpersonal skills, not just the technical skills, which again are overemphasized still in universities, to work through those kind of conflicts and really, benefit from the diversity that's on the team. So we can't just have more diversity for the sake of diversity. It has to come along with the right skills, training, feedback, and psychologically safe environments. New ideas, Sergio says, exactly. So basically innovation, right? innovation. I'd say a lot of the simple problems, in this world have been solved. And now we're dealing with a VUCA world, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it's moving faster and faster and faster. There's not many, problems left that can be solved by a person. And the bonus of solving it as a group is that people will tend to have a lot more buy-in, right? Because they felt like they were part of the process. So, and different approaches for getting to the same goal. Yeah. When we think about how we should tackle a goal, we often come up with an idea and kind of feel like that's probably the only real way to do it. And again, the benefit of having some conflict, some healthy conflict about that is we might come up with something completely different that integrates a lot of different perspectives. So how about the bad side? Because I think that's what people normally think about when they hear the word conflict. It has a negative connotation in general. So that's usually easier for people to come up with ideas for. What are some of the sort of bad things that come to mind when you think about conflict? Tension, uncomfortable exchanges, Katie says. Yeah, so that's the thing about conflict. It inherently creates a sense of tension, doesn't it? And I think as human beings, we are wired to reduce tension. We don't like tension. We don't like uncertainty. Conflict naturally brings up those kinds of things. And I think it's a skill to try to catch yourself from having a knee-jerk reaction against tension. Tension can be okay. I think about I'm helping a faculty, I'll say, with their strategy right now, developing their strategy. And whenever you're talking about strategy and prioritization of resource allocation, it naturally brings up a state of tension, right? And people just want it, they want it just resolved right away. And I try to just encourage them to take their time, right? It's okay to be in that space for a while and explore that space. In fact, probably better things will come out of it. So Amanda says, causes people to shut down. It can absolutely cause people to shut down. A lot of people, it's fight or flight, right? So that's essentially their flight response is, I just don't participate anymore. This is sort of outside my comfort zone. I shut down. Other people will take a completely different approach. See if it's there. But take an aggressive approach, lose sort of control, and start saying things they regret later, right? And probably a lot of us have done that, whether in our personal lives, in our professional lives, or both. So again, using your emotional intelligence, or social dexterity, it's really important to keep an eye on your emotional state, during a conflict exchange. Someone once told me, and it's always stuck with me, you can think about it from a scale of 0 to 10, right? Where 0 is you're totally calm and collected, and 10 is complete and utter rage, right? You're seeing red and nothing else, and there will be blood, right? And if you feel yourself getting to a 3, you're on your way to a 5. And once you hit a 5, the executive functioning starting to shut down. You're starting to go into that lower brain region that is much more automatic and is all about self-preservation, right? And from there, it's a quick slide to the 10, and nothing good happens in that zone. So you need to kind of be on top of where you're at, and if you need a break, that is fine. You know what I mean? So always kind of monitor that. So Tracy says good people can leave the team with prolonged unresolved conflict. I think it's definitely one of the big reasons why people quit organizations or try to find another team. they just don't see a path forward. Oftentimes it's a conflict with their manager or with their leader or someone else where there's a power differential. And they say people quit bosses, not organizations, and I think that's 100% true. So that's a good point. So grudges, retaliation, labeling of individuals in the group. Yeah, that's getting at the depersonalization, right? So we try to, and again, this comes back to the connect before content, right? If we start losing that trust bank and that sort of relational connection to somebody, and we just want to blanket label them with some negative attributes, because it makes it a kind of binary decision for us, which is, this person's very bad, right? This person's evil, therefore I can't resolve this and I'm powerless, as opposed to, this person's much more than this, and there's a lot of different ways we can approach this. Again, growth versus kind of a fixed mindset there, right? So, and destroying collaboration and trust, and that would be the kind of thing that would happen, when you get to that emotional scale of 5 or more, and sort of the loss of control, right? Then you get into doing things that you regret and are very difficult to undo. So yeah, this is why I love this topic, because we can all relate to it. We want to take advantage and harness the good, but the problem is, in going through that, there's always a risk of spillover into the bad, right? And how do we avoid that? And that was the subject of my dissertation. And I wish I had, a magic fix to this, and I don't. The bottom line is it's hard, but there's little things you can do, and it's a part of your, lifetime, journey of development and self-actualization as a human being, to really be able to master this. And I mean, even if you look back at, famous philosophers, I mean, they talk a lot about this, and ways of approaching it and mindsets to have, but you still see that it's never easy, right? It's never easy. And that's why they write about it. So again, a few more ideas for me. Conflicts can cost money. I was working with the dean's team for our Faculty of Science a long time ago, probably 10 years. And I thought these deans are they're not gonna want to talk about conflict. This is a really soft subject. I mean, I had the head of math, I had the head of physics. I mean, I just felt like it was going to be a difficult day. And early on in the day, one of them took me aside and said, of the 60 million in grant funding I've been involved in, 20 million has been compromised because of conflicts among the PI team. And I thought, okay, like, it gave me a lot of confidence about the importance of this. So I really appreciated that. Of course, in medicine, there's all kinds of examples of team conflict, causing errors, essentially, right? So you think in surgical teams, conflicts among surgeon, anesthesiologist, surgeon, and nurses, and it's a real problem, right? It's a real problem if it's not handled. So, and then you could all kinds of sports analogies. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Michael Jordan documentary that was out a little while ago. Great documentary in a lot of ways. But there's a huge feud that Michael Jordan had with Isaiah Thomas, and they were arguably the two best players in the NBA at the time, and only one of them was allowed to go to the Olympics because they hated each other so much. And that's just suboptimal, right? We always want to optimize, and it's kind of weird to think that a conflict could have such a deep impact. So we'll see. one of the ways of kind of bifurcating conflict then is kind of, again, the good and the bad. So we want to have productive conflict, fact-driven conflict about the task without it over like spilling over into that kind of destructive relational piece, right? So that's the thing. A lot easier said than done. People say, let's have a task-based conversation that has no emotion. That's difficult. Our identities are wrapped up in our professions and our work in part, right? And so, when we're getting quote unquote negative feedback, I'll just use that term in this example, it takes a very mature person to be able to accept that as purely fact-based, even if it is, right? So I love the idea, focus on the task rather than the person, right? The reality is that's difficult to do, but we do need to strive for it. I agree. And just before we go into the conflict styles, I always like to point out the importance of expression as well, because it's not directly addressed in the conflict styles framework, but I think it's critical to cover, which is it's not just about what you say, right? So I feel like in the academic environment I came up in, this was my perception, was that if you were right about something, if you're factually correct, you could say it however you want. You could be rude, you could be dismissive, right? You could interrupt people, you could talk over people, and it doesn't matter because you're right. You're the expert. So you get to be an ass. Okay. And that's just not the right way to operate. It's just not. And so, we need to change our cultures around this, and hopefully yours is not that way. But it can be at least as important or more important how the conflict is expressed. And, our kind of go-to model of that right now is it could be very direct, or it could be more vague, and it could be intense, aggressive, or it could be low intensity, sort of calm and composed in the way that it's expressed. And the way to have a good problem-solving conflict would be to, directly state what your concern is and do it in a calm and collected manner, right? That's kind of the problem solving. Any other part of that 2x2 is less likely to have a positive outcome. So just remember, it's not what you say all the time. It can really be how you say it. And salespeople know this, right? A lot of times salespeople are not the technical people, but they get your trust because of the way that they communicate if they're doing well. And you're more likely to buy. Even though you're not buying based on the technicals necessarily. So again, job interviews is another thing. It's how you say things can be so important. So you need to keep that in mind. All right, so let's shift gears and get into the conflict management styles. All right, so this is a very, very, again, intuitive kind of model. If you're able to do the assessment, and you haven't already, go back into itpmetrics.com. You'll have to log in, and you'll see in your dashboard a PDF report you can download, and you can get your percentile scores on these things. And the meaning of the styles is quite simple, but it's based on something called the dual concern model, which is you have a concern for satisfying others' interests in a conflict, and you can have a concern for satisfying your own interests, a certain continuum for both of those. And if you cross those two axes, you get these different styles. So if I'm primarily concerned with my own interests and objectives in a conflict, like I want X to happen, and I'm coming into the discussion with that mindset, I'll be more likely to use a dominating style, where I'm not really concerned about, hearing that much from the other person, other than, advocating for the merits of my perspective, and hopefully they agree to roughly that. right? So that'd be dominating. And it's not, none of these are better than the others. There's a time and a place for everyone, and that's the key learning outcome here. Okay, that's key learning outcome. There's no good or bad profile of scores here. It's to provide self-insight. There's a great, when you're a leader and you're making a decision that needs to be made quickly, and you have the authority to make that decision, and people have kind of elected you in one way or another to have that role. I mean, you make that decision, right? You don't go into integrating and consult everybody and drag it out. So integrating would be that problem solving kind of mode where you're really interested in the other person's perspective and interest and your own. So you're trying to optimize the solution space. And to do that, though, you need that relationship piece. You need to be able to understand what matters to this person. What is this person's true goals for this conflict? And that probably means you need a good pre-existing relationship with them. And, you need to ask them, specifically about that. You need to be open to asking them, what is it that you would love to get out of this? If you're using the dominating style, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't be doing that, right? You would be just coming in and saying, okay, here's what I think we should do. And that, again, could be fine. But when we want to, make a really important collective decision that we need everyone to buy into as much as possible, integrating would be a better style, because, we're trying to come together to find a more creative solution to move forward with. And that's where the learning happens, right? So it's a great style to use for really high impact, highly consequential, highly complex decisions that you need people to support and get behind. The downside is, of course, one of them is that this takes a lot more time, right? It's much more of an investment. So it's not even practical to use this style all the time. Accommodating would be kind of like yielding to other people's perspective. So oftentimes people who score high on this and use this will still express what they think or what they want. But if they run into somebody more dominating, they'll essentially yield when that person kind of digs in on their position. They'll bring it up, their perspective, and then they'll kind of let it slide, right? With avoiding, it's a low. So, there's different reasons for using this. Sometimes it can be, those can be actually malicious reasons, kind of a passive aggressive form of avoiding, right? Other times it's just a severe discomfort with conflict, right? The kind of shutting down to conflict kind of reaction. Another one would be a very constructive one, which would be the situations become overheated and we just need some time to settle down. And sometimes, someone who's already overheated is beyond the ability to recognize that. And so it takes the other person to say, look, we got to take a cool off period and we come back to this. And there's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't shy away from doing that. Compromising is in the middle. It's like a low grade integrating where each side gives up something in order to come to a resolution so you can move forward. So it's not that optimization that integrating looks to get, but sometimes the integrative solution feels impossible to reach, or maybe is impossible to reach. So it could be mutually exclusive interests, in which case compromising might be the only option to make a resolution. All right, so that's kind of the model. I think it's fairly straightforward. People seem to pick it up pretty quickly. And, the question Brad says, it's a great question. Are these styles dynamic and situational? So yes and yes. You can move around. That's the whole purpose of this model, and a perfect comment Brad made as a takeaway is that, you'll have higher or lower scores on these, and that's your kind of preferred approach. And if you didn't do the assessment, you just look at these and think, which one to me is the one that speaks to me? If you reflect, which ones are the ones that I kind of use more or less, and just try to think about trying out some different styles as the situation calls for it, right? If I mean, I've already spoke to a number of pros and cons of these, so I think you can run with that. And they're also dynamic. So within a particular conflict episode, yeah, you might flip a bit. In fact, let me just give you an example of that where I talk about somebody in my lab here. So this is a profile of somebody who used to be in my lab. So this person, so you take a second to look at that and sort of think about that. So it's always high concern for self, right? But sometimes it's also high concern for other, but not always. So this is the kind of person who is a social butterfly, right? So they were the person who would buzz around the office. This was pre-pandemic when people actually came in. And she just like knew everybody really, really well. She knew kind of what they were working on, what their interests were, spent, she was the one who would have like parties, that sort of thing. So, but also super, super high achiever and had her own career trajectory and goals, and just would really use the integrating style as much as possible to like find ways that we could work together so that everybody felt a part of the team and the part of the decisions. I loved it. It was awesome to have her in the team because that's a time consuming, job. If integrating wasn't really working out, she would use the dominating style without hesitation because, again, very achievement driven. If that wasn't working, it would go to compromise. Fine, I'll give up something, but like I expect something in return, right? And you can see this is a person who really never let their own interests slide. That would be using an avoiding or accommodating style. Okay, so that's when I say story, I think that's a more useful way of interpreting scores like this. Is not so much as a univariate or a dimension by dimension kind of score, but kind of looking at the profile and knowing yourself. What's your kind of intuitive way or default way of approaching conflicts? So that's one thing to know in terms of self-awareness. And then again, what could I do a little bit differently? Like she might say, look, sometimes the conflict is just really not that important to me relative to how important it is or how impactful this decision is for someone else. Like maybe they're the one doing the work, right? Like there's nothing worse than somebody chiming in with a bunch of conflicting views who has no like skin in the game, so to speak, about the outcome. I'm thinking of somebody I work with. It's very frustrating because for what should be obvious reasons. Okay, so try to keep an eye on that's an example where somebody could say, look, this is a time where I can use accommodating. Like here's my perspective. Take it as advisement, but you're the one who's going to have to maybe like live with the challenges of this decision. It's also the fail first concept, right? Or fail forward, right? Which is sometimes people just have to go down a path and maybe learn for themselves that it wasn't the best path. And that can happen in parenting too, as you know. Another good question from Brad: do you view the style assessment more of a basal or inherent style where one starts from? I would absolutely view it as that for sure. Like there would be a strong genetic component to these because they're highly related to personality traits. I published a paper on that. Huge overlap there, and personality itself is, depending on the trait, about half inherited, so genetic. And the other significant component would be the role models that you had as a kid, right? So how did they handle conflict? How was conflict handled in your home? That's going to have a huge impact. But then two, your role will as well. I already mentioned leaders tend to use dominating more because in part the role actually requires them to do that. And then they're also the ones held accountable for decisions made by their team. So they probably feel a real need to make sure they're comfortable with the decisions that are being made. But you just want to watch that you're not overusing that style, because you're not taking advantage of the diversity in your team. If that makes sense. So think about your story. What's your highest? If some people have done the assessment, I'd love if you popped in the chat. What's your highest? Just so we have a sense of what is happening in the room in that respect. And if you didn't do the assessment, which are the one or two that kind of jump out at you that you feel that you use a lot? And then I'll just encourage you to kind of reflect on situations going forward where you could use some of the other styles. So Amanda says compromising 81. Nice, Tracy. Integrating 82. So yeah, I mean, 81, 82 percentiles, those are really high. So it's interesting. Like, I'd love to have more time with you so I could, maybe we'll be able to use the office or consult hours. We can dig into your reports a little more. And we can try to understand why is that and how is that working for you? And do you want to be a little more balanced at times? Heather's using integrating and compromising a lot. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because again, compromising is just kind of that low grade integrating. You can think about these as axes. Like if there's an X here, you can think of the continuum going that direction as well. You can shift the continuum. So that's common. And certainly, Amanda, I'll be happy to chat. So yeah. Again, I've kind of touched on this, and I want to leave some time for Q&A, but the slide just gets into the key point, and compromising would be here too. There's a time and a place for every style, right? And so no one best style. It's just if you can kind of use your kind of metacognition and step outside of yourself in a situation, step outside of your kind of ego and pride. We all have it. It's psychology. And just try to think more broadly, what's best for this situation and what style might be the best. And again, you can try that and then flip to another one if it's sort of not working. That's the dynamics of it. And then the last one I'll kind of leave you with is good days and bad days. Right? So dominating on a good day, when you're having a good day, what would that look like? Okay, it would look like assertiveness, confidence, leadership, stepping up, right? Creating some certainty when it feels like there's uncertainty. On a bad day, what would dominating look like? On a bad day, dominating looks like you're a know-it-all, you're not interested in other people's perspective, you're steamrolling, you're bulldozing. Okay, so again, going back to being in touch with our sort of emotional state, our rested state. Are we rested or not? Right? Our expression of these things will be quite different. Again, avoiding it you might intend for avoiding to signal that you're just uncomfortable or you're just trying to be cooperative. It could be interpreted as you're not engaged, you don't care, and other kind, or again, passive aggressiveness, right? Where you're just ignoring and discounting somebody, or you're intentionally not responding to somebody, which would evoke a negative reaction, right? So just really important to kind of keep that in mind. Good. So good takeaways here. We try to have task conflict without the relationship conflict. We want to have problem solving with good expression. And we need to keep in mind that, conflict spirals can happen and it can escalate very, very quickly. The people in law enforcement get a lot of training on conflict because they know that conflicts can escalate so rapidly, and next thing you know, someone's hurt or someone's killed, and it was all just because it got out of control in an unnecessary kind of way because people didn't have the right sort of interpersonal tools to recognize what was going on and manage it accordingly. So again, no one ideal type. Be aware of your knee-jerk reactions and try to counteract that, and be aware that there are the 5 styles at least, but these 5 styles are memorable, and that try some of those ones that make you feel a little uncomfortable. What's the worst that can happen? You can try it in a low risk scenario first. All right, so good. Little photo of my lab, some of my support. So thank you very much. I guess we just do have only a couple minutes if there are any remaining questions and answers. But again, I do have a couple of hours, couple different sessions available for free consults if you'd love to talk. I am a researcher, so if you have research ideas, I'm always interested in that too. I work quite a bit with our med school. And yeah, thank you very much for coming. It was really fun to be here.
As people are maybe preparing their last question, just want to send a reminder to use the link that we're going to send around for the evaluations, and we'll have a part of that will where you can sign up for a consulting session with Tom.
Well, don't hesitate to reach out, right? Don't be a stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish for the spice of this presentation that touch on the current Hamas-Israel conflict. Just it's hard to say, where does this fall into? But we know the whole story, so that would be a whole chapter in your book.
It would, and like I mentioned, like it's out of my scope of practice. Let's say but it's you're bang on, and when I go mention that International Association of Conflict Management, their conference that I go to, they have whole sections on that. People studying, you know, conflicts among cultures, nations. That kind of thing, geopolitical stuff. It's a lot more macro. I'm just a psychologist, but fundamentally, it probably can be traced back to similar origins. Great point.
And I happen to be a retired pastor, so it's a very tricky kind of situation for me. And so thank you. This is an excellent presentation. I appreciate every second of it.
Thank you for the feedback, and thank you for coming, and same to everybody.
Thank you.
It does look like there is one question in the chat. They say, do these concepts apply equally well with conflicts within families?
I think so. I don't study that. I'm not a clinical psychologist or a counseling or family psychologist at all. So take it with a grain of salt, but I don't see how they don't. I mean, I see it play out in my own life and people who've approached me after sessions like this. So I 100% use these strategies with my spouse, and suggest people do with theirs as well. No question. Yeah. And so you can, that's why I say when you take the assessment, take it with a professional mindset on, because your styles are totally different at home than they are in your professional life. And you can go back in and take as many of these as you want for free, and you can take it with the mindset of, what am I like at home, or what am I like in the community, or what am I like with my sports team, or whatever, and you will see different profiles, and that could be instructive. I think that could be useful.